fearless leader, Sasha, tweeted out a prompt yesterday about what random sports moment. So not really associated. There's a couple of these that have like the teams that I like in there, but they're not championship moments or anything like that. There's
right. It's not directly correlated to your fandom.
Yeah, like it's not like the 04 Red Sox winning the World Series or something like that, right? These are, I think all three of mine are, well, the two of mine that are with teams I like are regular season moments, just kind of these random moments. So we're going to do that. We're going to kind of walk through why it's sort of like the Roman Empire thing we did, except for a little bit more specific and do a few specific moments. Andrew and I each have 3 of those, so we will get to that. Coming up at 8:30, we're going to talk to Supernova's associate head coach, Laura Kuhn. We will talk to Brian Spielberger from PFF, he covers the NFL. We will talk to him at 8:45. Of course, at 9 o'clock, we'll talk to our very own Mike Sauter about the high school and Nebraska basketball sports scene. At 9:30, we had some big news from Union Omaha yesterday with the unveiling of their stadium plans for downtown Omaha.
That looks so sick.
So we're going to talk to our friend Marty Cordero to learn a little bit more about that, and then we will wrap up the show as we always do on Friday with Matt Rhule. But wanted to hop back into that conversation we were having about Coach Rhule and going in with that clip that Shane played about leadership. And you mentioned something in the first segment that kind of caught my attention. You were talking about the player retention and why people want to follow him and things like that. And it wasn't just about, hey, I want to follow him. You're like, I want to emulate him. I want to be like him. And I think it's maybe more like I want to be, not that you want to be Coach Rhule, but you want to be a man like Coach Rhule. You want to be a person who cares about other people like Coach Rhule does. And it's kind of a really weird analogy, but the first season of Ted Lasso that I watched, right? The overwhelming themes of that, especially first season for me, were his kindness to people and his accountability when he did something wrong. When he did something wrong, he took ownership for it every single time. Like, if you rewatch that show, especially the first season, look at how many times, and you can tell who the good people in that show are versus the bad people in that show are, versus if they take accountability and how they take accountability, right? Because there's basically 3 different ways. There's taking accountability without being called out on it. You're like, hey, I recognize I did this wrong. I'm going to come forward and be like, that's my bad. I apologize. Then there's the people who they get called out on something and you're like, you know what? I didn't see that. You're right. That's on me. Then you've got the people who get called out on it and then make excuses. They get called out on it and then they try and convince you they didn't do anything wrong. Watch that show again with that framework and you'll be like, oh. And
be curious.
Yeah, not judgmental, right? And so when I watched that show, though, the first time I watched the first season, and I've seen that show several times because I'm obsessed with it.
But very good show.
The first time I watched that first season, I had this really strange feeling of this show makes me want to be a better person because of the example that Ted Lasso leads. And listen, I get it's a fictional character, right? But I think it's a similar situation when people talk to Coach Rhule. I think they leave conversations with Coach Rhule, maybe not saying, oh, I want to be a better person, but maybe saying, I think he can help me become the best version of myself. And that is incredibly important when you're talking about an era of free player movement and NIL, and people have a lot of reasons to leave and not a lot of reasons to stay. But you have to give them something more than, well, we'll match whatever NIL deal comes through the door. Or we'll make sure we can guarantee playing time or whatever, because he doesn't do that. He doesn't guarantee playing time. And so if you're not guaranteeing playing time, and yeah, they're on par with NIL, like that's fine, whatever. But other people have as much money or more money. Other people have great resources. Other people have great facilities. What's the difference maker for a place like Nebraska? And it's that when the head coach speaks, the people that listen say, that guy can help me be the best version of myself. And that changes everything, because that will make up for whatever deficiencies that you may have in infrastructure or whatever else. And for some people, at least, you'll be like, oh yeah, no, I'll take a little less to stay here. I'll take a non-guarantee to stay here because I believe long-term, that's what's best for me. And the people that stay are the people that are going to lead Nebraska where they want to go.
Well, and everybody wants to be challenged, right? And so, like,
Not everybody knows it, though.
Coach Rhule, like, doesn't just sit down in a meeting and try to play match game, like you said. What he does a really good job of, and then I've had, conversations with him before, is no matter what the situation is, or if it's a casual sit down or if it's a professional sit down, the way that he presents information to you is more in like a challenging light. He makes you think, right? And that's what I think is the biggest takeaway for a lot of recruits at the end of the day is, he's not BSing you when you walk into the room, and he makes you want to listen. Right? And there are so many situations where, like, I'm sitting somewhere and I'm just like, like, when is this going to be over?
Yeah.
Like, there are plenty of times where when I go to church and, the priest is up there for a homily and I'm sitting there and I'm like, man, if you would have stopped right there, the message would have been great. But then you added on and added on. And then what does my mind do? It goes left, it goes right, it goes forward, it goes back. I'm not the only one that thinks that either.
Yeah. It's very common.
But when you know your timing, when you know, like, how to present the challenge, and then just like let the challenge speak for itself and not try to over explain the challenge. Like, that's what Coach Rhule does really well, because you sit there and you're just in awe of what he's telling you. And you're like, man, I can relate that to this aspect of my life. Coach Rhule may say, like, frontline guys are the quarterback and the head coach that have to go talk to the media after a loss and they're 1-14 and, it's not a fun thing to do. But, that example makes me think about that one time in school where I had to do this project, and like, people always take somebody else's personal challenge and apply it to, how can I relate to that? But he lets the challenge speak for itself. And that's why you see a lot of these young players want to come play for Coach Rhule, because you're right. They don't know they want to be challenged, but when they are presented with that challenge, it becomes like a fire inside of them to prove it, to prove that you can beat that challenge.
It excites them in a way that they probably haven't been, motivated by previously. Exciting. Like you mentioned, kind of an example with the priest. My favorite teachers that I ever had weren't the ones that let me skate by and do whatever I wanted and whatever, although, like, I enjoyed that at the time. But it was the ones that are like, hey, you're capable of more than this. I'm going to need you to provide.
Well, it's also the ones, too, that you wanted to prove to.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I had a teacher in high school. He was my running coach in grade school, ended up being my chemistry teacher in high school. And, like, I had, like, a good relationship with him. So I wanted to prove to him that I could get this work done, not only efficiently, but also so I could overachieve in that way, because I wanted to show you that I care. And, like, when you have a teacher like that stand in front of you, you're going to get players that also want to prove to you, like, I'm going to be the best right now.
Well, and part of it too is like when someone believes in you, right? Because the way I felt with the teachers specifically in high school were these two teachers. One of them was my Latin teacher. One of them was my AP American History teacher and civics teacher, RIP Mr. Eicher. They believed in me, and that I had more in me, whether intelligence, whatever, than I was giving them. And so I wanted to prove them right about what they believed about me. And it's the same thing when you believe the opposite. If you don't believe in someone, they're going to try and prove you right. If you do believe in someone, they're going to try and prove you right. So you get to decide which thing they're trying to prove. Coming up next, there's been a lot of coaching movement across a bunch of different sports over the last week or so. Let's get into some of that next here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.